Hello and good day, everybody, and welcome back to Storytime by Professor Quibblefingers. I hope you're all doing well and feeling nicely rested. I would offer you some sweet treats, but unfortunately, this week's baked goods budget has gone on buckets. The roof on the West Ring is beginning to sag rather alarmingly, and I've had to borrow Roger the gardener's rake just so I could prop it up and stop it from crushing my collection of signed encyclopedias. However, I am still a graceful host, and I hope you will enjoy Miss Lakshmana's buttered scones. They are rather delightful. Now, allow me to regale you with one of my tales. Now, some of you may be wondering, how did I become a professor in the first place? After all, with all my time in badminton, I showed little aptitude for anything beyond shooting things, getting rejected by beautiful women with handle horns. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. In any case, how I became a professor actually started with my kidnapping and subsequent escape from the foul clutches of one Captain Skullbeard. There's also a story of how I learned that anything can be edible, so long as it's not a deep-fried water ladybird. It was on the day of October 18th I found myself in an awkward situation. Having gotten beastily drunk, following my humiliation at the hands of one Escarina Buntington, I had been shanghaied and taken to sea by the most dastardly villains of the vilest sort. It was a terrible thing, dragged off with just one shoe, set to work by the dread pirate Captain Skullbeard. Now, he got his name not for having a skull for a beard, as some might presume, but because at some point he'd had his head chopped off. The surgeon, who had apparently reattached it, though, had been beastily drunk, and, they'd accidentally stitched his head on upside down, meaning his beard was growing up into the air. Just don't ask about the neck hole. It's best not to think about. It's... I was soon set to work, and after some surreptitious discussion with the crew, I learned of our ship and purpose. We were on board a decrepit privateering sloop known as the Antelope, and with the 20 of us on board, we were sailing for the New World in search of ships to plunder. Plunder? Ugh. We were listening to port right out of the harbour, our sails full of holes, a one-legged cook, and cracked 4-pounder cannons as weapons. If we'd find anything bigger than a fishing bark, we'd be toast! Toast, I say! The captain assured us, however, we wouldn't fire a single shot, and that we'd be home in time for tea, or a pile of looted gold. Adventure. I've been on many adventures in my time, but I can assure you that my time spent on board the Antelope was the worst I ever experienced. 91 days at sea to reach the New World, pumping like mad to keep the list down. Storms, sharks, killer seductive mermaids, and 14 inches of damp hammock in which to sleep in a room full of 20 snoring men. I will tell you, I'd rather be forced to walk through a minefield with extremely heavy shoes than go through that again. Also, for those who don't know, and in spite of what Hollywood will tell you, swabbing the decks has nothing to do with keeping the ship clean. It's actually to keep the wood wet and keep the planks swollen, thus preventing the ship from leaking. And then again, in the state the Antelope was in, I don't think any of us would have really noticed. The food was perhaps the worst. jellied eels and marmite for breakfast. Oh! Beef so green you could have used it as a potted plant. And biscuits full of worms. Oh, for the last one, though, there is a trick. If you have to choose between two worm-infested biscuits, which do you choose? Well, it's quite simple, my friends. You must always choose the one that is the lesser of two weevils. Finally, on the Umto 14th, we've finally reached the tropical islands of the New World. The stifling heat, the giant insects, the jellied eagles. Oh, it was foul. But Captain Skullbeard was determined that we would not return home without a few prizes. And so he drove us mercilessly, scouting night and day for a viable target. And on the 7th day, we spotted her, a fat merchantman laden with gold. With our clapped-out sails and our worn-out pumps, it took us 2 days to catch her, at which point we rolled out our cracked 4-pounders and prepared for a fight. Skullbeard was yelling, and the 20 of us prepared for battle, pikes and muskets and cutlasses in hand. And then the other ship rolled out its portholes, and oh, that wasn't a merchant ship. That was a 40-gun frigate with... Oh, those are 24-pounders. It's quite something when you realise that you're attempting to attack a ship with cannons 6 times the size of your own. You're essentially lobbing coconuts at a battleship. The first salvo of theirs, well, it was devastating. Stove in our hull, boat broke down the mast, smoke everywhere, deafening noise, and then we were boarded! There were all kinds of them. They came across with axes and swords, a cutlass in his teeth. A monkey swam across, dual-wielding pistols. And a third one in his tail, too. And then came a sizzling and a whirring. They had thrown boarding grenades. I ducked behind one of our cannons. Explosions and shrapnel flew all over the place as their beastly crews stormed aboard. One of them, he had fuses in his hair and painted his face with soot to make himself look like the devil had come to board us. He had a sword in his teeth, murder in his eyes, and he was coming at me with an axe. I could see my death looming before me, and knowing I didn't stand much chance, I kicked him in the nuts and ran away. It was then that a shout echoed out. I half turned to see Skullbeard about to murder the lot of us. He'd taken a carronade off the mounted rail, filled it with grape shot, and with a mad look in his eye, he was aiming it down the length of the ship, prepared to kill everyone aboard in order to regain command. Obviously, I was not about to die for a madman, so I grabbed a grenade and I tossed it at him. Well, as luck would have it, I knocked his head clean off, and his carcass started stumbling around with an explosive charge on top of his neck stump. Oh dear. So began quite a scramble as we tried to get out of the way of the headless exploding zombie, until eventually he tripped over and landed. Well, I would say head first. It should be grenade first, in a pile of gunpowder bags. Now, I've seen the great fireworks display at Twynford. They hold on New Year's Eve, but it was, well, this might not be as big an explosion, but it was certainly almost as impressive. I don't remember much about what happened next, whether I jumped or was blown overboard, but the next thing I know, I was soaking wet underwater, my ears ringing and a searing pain in my head. There was darkness all around me, and as I reached up to find out why my head was hurting, something had engulfed me. I'd been half swallowed by a whoopee-gong shark. But I was too big-headed, apparently. I got stuck halfway down. Sensing my end, I pulled myself free and punched the bugger in the nose. He came at me, teeth snapping and jaws clashing, and so I grabbed the idiot and I rotated him. Quickly making my escape before he could take a bite out of any of the rest of me. The next few minutes were a blur, with waves, sharp rocks, sea urchins, and the sound of distant ships exploding. I finally came to my senses, washed ashore on some tropical island in the middle of nowhere. No signs of the ships at all, apart from a distant pool of smoke. I could only assume that the Antelope and Skullbeard and the merchant/frigate that we'd attacked had all been destroyed. So there I was, alone. Just me, my clothes, pocket knife. I'd finally found a spare shoe, thankfully. So I was mismatched feet. And as luck would have it, a crate come washing ashore, with 200 more boots in it. I searched the beach and found a notebook and a pencil when I began to record what I discovered there. Now here's a bit of an interesting fact. If you want to conserve something, you can go in with high-minded ideals of, save the whales or save the tigers, save the panda bears and all this. But what that will actually get you is a headache and a lot of wasted money. What you actually need to do if you plan to conserve anything is you need to speak to the people whose lives depend on interacting with them. Take elephants. If you were to preserve a herd of elephants, what better way to do so than to speak to the farmers who lose crops to said beasts, and to speak to the hunters who rely on elephant tusks for their living. It is no coincidence that many of the oldest and largest national parks and game reserves in the world were created by hunters instead of conservationists. Bit of an odd tangent, I know, but it does explain how I became the single greatest mind, the man who knows the most of the creatures of Bingo Bango Island. You can read about this in my book, Professor John T. Quibblefingers and the Island of Killer Broccoli. Available now for publishing for £4, 8 shillings and 6pence. Now, the island got this second name because at some point, some bugger had visited the island and planted a vegetable garden there. Now, that's all well and good, but these vegetables have somehow gotten huge. And some had developed a taste for flesh. As it was, I spent weeks living in fear of being attacked by giant killer broccoli monsters. They'd sneak up on me when I wasn't looking and attempt to nibble me with their ferocious teeth. Luckily, I quickly learned that a well-aimed boot to the head was an effective method of countering them. But they were always there, lurking in the darkness, making spooky broccoli noises. And they weren't the only things that called this island, though. The side hill bounder, with its legs shorter on one side so it could effectively navigate mountains. And what made so? For those who don't know this creature, it is similar to a wild haggis. You know, it's as big as 4 cats and has a retractable nose so it can leap up a gibbet. And instead of a mouth, it's got 4 arses. And you see, in order to get from mountain to mountain, it will spread its arses and start flapping away. It'll fly up into the air and swoop around. That is unless it sees a flute player. At which point, it'll dive down and impale itself on it, thinking it's a mate. And that, my friends, is how we invented bagpipes. There's also the ferocious sailfin crocodile, which can erect its sail and travel between islands. I hear that it is by leaping on the backs of these creatures that we discovered the ability to surf. Although, the sort of person who would leap on the back of a crocodile must be an absolute madman. And of course, the island was also infested with the dreaded Behinder. You don't even want to know what that thing is. Ooh, it is a vile creature. There is, however, one species above all others that made Bingo Bango Island famous: Flapperdoofus ignoramus, also known by its common name, the Waterloony bird. Now, the most astonishing thing about the Waterloony bird is that it has absolutely no survival instincts. They can only fly during rainstorms, and when they do, they have to do it backwards, upside down, in reverse. They're definitely afraid of the colour yellow, and they will attempt to consume anything that they'll fit into their beaks. Yet the only thing they can digest, a kind of spiny, prickly fruit, they are highly allergic to. Perhaps the most ridiculous of all, I once saw one climb to the top of a tree during a thunderstorm to see what was going on. It was probably struck by lightning and fell down dead, whereupon a second climbed up the same tree to see what happened to the first one. By the following day, there were 17 roasted Waterloony birds down there. It is here that we come to one of the big things I learned about the Waterloony bird. The fact that they are able to survive despite their lack of survival instincts. Firstly, they are prodigious breeders. They lay 7 eggs every 15 minutes. And despite the fact that most of them are destroyed, there's always just enough of them around for them to keep on living. No, you can't make an omelette out of them. I really wouldn't recommend it. It will get out of the pan and escape. The second, of course, though, and I cannot stress this enough, deep-fried Waterloony bird is completely inedible. In fact, Waterloony birds are the most foully disgusting thing I have ever eaten. There is no way to make a Waterloony palatable. You can add spices, sauces, force of will. You could bury it underground for 6 years, dig it up, hang it in the shed, and then try and eat it, like they do with that shark up in the frozen Northlands. And no, it still does not work. You cannot eat a Waterloony bird. It's disgusting. I thought jellied eels and marmite were vile, but mix that with mashed bananas, dried oatmeal, and whatever that skunk is that you find at the bottom of the fridge if you haven't cleaned it out often enough. That's pretty much the taste, while its texture is that of a lettuce that has been left out in the sun for too long. Ugh. I must say, though, it is because of these that I was able to eventually make my fortune and save the family from bankruptcy. But that's a tale for later. Shh. As it was, I was forced to get resourceful, make do with what I had. I soon became accustomed to a diet of boots in mud. I particularly became fond of mud pies with shoe pastry. I am very thankful for my crate of 200 boots. Yeah, boil it long enough and you can make them taste almost palatable. There was, of course, also one single lonely coconut tree, because there's always a single lonely coconut tree at an island like this. But unfortunately, it was guarded by a dangerous man-eating shark, the very same one who attacked me before, the wobbegong, who I came to know as Dopey Dick. What's it they say? Let me see if I can get the voice right. Dang old fin-flapping flounder! These are gosh darn hammerhead halibut. Oh, excuse me, I mustn't do that. I think I just ruptured something important. Oh. Of course, there's also the killer broccoli, but I'm generally against the consumption of sentient creatures, as a matter of course. So there I was, alone on an island with sharks, killer vegetables and inedible birds, living on a dwindling supply of boots and the occasional coconut. My prospects seemed grim. But then one day, salvation! A ship! A 20-foot one! Working quickly, I fashioned a banner out of my trousers and attempted to flag it down, only to watch it keep on sailing past. And worse still, the broccoli had noticed me and was coming to get me. It was going to eat me ass. Ooh! They were rubbing their tummies and carrying a large pot between them full of melted cheese. Oh, I don't know where they got the cheese from, but yeah, it's best not to question it when you're under attack by killer broccoli. I was in no need to be a vegetables dinner neither, and so I took off, trouserless, down the beach. With the boat disappearing, I grabbed the last of my boots and fashioned a lasso out of the shoelaces, which I'd been using as an alternative to spaghetti, before leaping into the water. It's there I found Dopey Dick, and he came at me once more, but this time I was ready. I caught him in the shoelaces and kicked him in the direction of the ship. Ah, there I was, skiing across the surface of the ocean, pulled along by the most ferocious of sharks, heading straight for my salvation. But then, the broccoli, they were surfing the back of a crocodile, and they were coming straight at me. Woo! They were snapping at my heels. I was getting pin cushioned to the backside. Woo! And they poked me. I slapped at them. They tried to skewer me. I sure boosted them. The crocodile lunged and grabbed Dopey Dick. It became a battle to the death. And with it, the broccoli made their final attack. They were preparing to turn me into soup. But they'd forgotten one crucial thing. Vegetables cannot swim. I dove into the ocean, leaving the foul veggies behind, and scrambled aboard the ship. Finally safe. Only to realise I was now facing a phalanx of cutlasses. It would seem I had made a miscalculation. The ship was not from Twinefoot at all. It was a naval vessel of the Dragon Empress. Oh boy, the Dragon Empress. The most ferocious, dangerous, seductive, and villainous woman I ever encountered. And now I was to be her prisoner. Out of the frying pan, into the supermassive volcano caldera, it seems. But I think this is a good place to stop. Thank you all for coming. Tune in next time for my adventures amongst the court of the Dragon Empress, my daring escape, and how I spent several months living as a goat. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. See you again soon. Cheerio!